Chapter 73. The art is forged into a sword, but thousands of chariots cannot stop it. Escape and change your name. Eat the wind and dew in the mountains. The white figure immediately moved dozens of feet along the streets. As he sang, a sword light danced around him like water. The Chongling guards along the way did not even have the power to fight back. They were sent flying upon contact and fell into the eaves on the sides. Hearing the song and seeing the invincible sword light, Qin Xian could not help but tremble. He did not even have the courage to pull out the long sword from the yellow bamboo tube. He could only shout in his heart, "By Shanshui! It really is by Shanshui!" The man who looked like a carriage driver casually grabbed an empty carriage. He held a sword in one hand and drove the carriage with the other. He followed behind the white figure. In a few breaths, he passed by Qin Xian and passed through the long alley. The rumbling of war chariots could be heard not far away. Dozens of Tiger Wolf Army SEAL chariots charged out of the flat streets and surrounded the carriage that was charging towards the outskirts of Chongling. The country is destroyed. The mountains and rivers are mourned. The subjects are responsible. While we are lowly, we will not hesitate. Today, we will fight Chongling, and in the future, we will kill the king of Qin and sacrifice the soul of our country. However, the rebellious song that carried an indescribable arrogance continued to sound. Like countless ferocious beasts, the formation chariots were not a match for it. The heavy chariots flew out from the sides like rice that had been thrown up by farmers and smashed into the houses on the sides. The thunderous sound of the landing continued to reverberate, and long smoke rose from all directions. The white figure surrounded by the flowing sword light seemed to enter uninhabited land. Like a prehistoric beast passing through Chongling, he charged towards the shores of the Wei River. More troops had not arrived yet. A dozen Divinity Bureau officials had just arrived at the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall. Among them, the Vice Bureau Chief of the Divinity Bureau, Qi Beihuai, saw the Chongling Guard Commandant sitting dispiritedly on the ground. Then he saw the pillars of smoke that shot into the sky like dragons. Hearing the shouts in the streets and alleys and the unstoppable song, he immediately realized what had happened. His face paled. He shouted almost hysterically, "Why is the Chongling Guard here? Why is the Chongling Guard here?" The Chongling Guard Commandant, sitting on the ground, heard Qi Beihuai's roar. He struggled to lift his head, blood dripping down his lips. However, he did not answer Qi Beihuai's question. Instead, he repeated softly like a puppet, "By Shanshui, why is Bai Shanshui here?" In the alleys of Chongling, as Bai Shanshui was carving out a path to the Wei River, He Zhaoxi and Ding Ning were still fighting in the Sword Trial Valley. Ding Ning slowly stood up from the dried leaves on the ground. Blood dripped from his lips, but he still slowly raised the last flower remnant sword. Still not admitting defeat, do you have to injure yourself to the point where you won't be able to cultivate for the next 1 or 2 months before you give up? Xiet Changsheng shouted angrily. Why are you still holding up your sword? Don't tell me you want to rely on this broken sword to fight your way out. Across from Ding Ning, He Zhaoxi had the same thought. He looked at Ding Ning and couldn't help but say softly, "You still want to fight?" At the side, Nangong Kaishu could no longer control her emotions. She wanted to stop Ding Ning from fighting, yet Ding Ning seemed to sense her emotions. He first turned to look at her and shook his head. Then he looked at He Zhaoxi. "I am familiar with your sword moves, so I only need to take this next blow." 1 blow to decide victory? Did he still have the confidence to win? He Zhaoxi's brow unconsciously furrowed. However, he felt that Ding Ning did not seem to be lying, so he prepared to use the safest method to deal with Ding Ning's blow. It is important for people to know their own limits. If you do not know your own limits, you will lose very badly, Ku Shichuan said coolly. He was very pleased, especially when even Xie Changsheng and the others who had been at odds with him could not help but scold Ding Ning. He felt even more pleased. No one responded to him because Ding Ning had started to move again. At the edge of the viewing platform, Shui Wangshu, who was sitting on a rattan chair with narrowed eyes, murmured softly to himself, "What are you selling?" As he muttered, he put his hands on his knees. Because of He Zhaoxi and Ding Ning's stances, he inexplicably felt that something was about to happen. His white beard was already sparse. If he bent it too much, he would look too ugly. He Zhaoxi's expression turned solemn as he started to move. His body once again faced Ding Ning in a straight line. The yellow longsword in his hand swung quickly, and then turned horizontally to form an arc in the air. This was the purest method of suppressing with power. The area the sword swept covered every possible direction Ding Ning could dodge, and forced Ding Ning to block this sword. This was the safest method of fighting, forcing the battle to be extremely simple. When this sword came out, most people on the viewing platform thought that Ding Ning could not block this sword. In the previous exchanges, Ding Ning had been sent flying by this simple but exceptionally effective slap. He had been unable to fight back. Ding Ning was still forced to use his sword to block like before. Yet, to everyone's surprise, this time was different. As he swung the remnant sword in his right hand, and countless small white flowers bloomed in the air, his left hand crushed a piece of wax. A yellow pill the size of a longan flew into his mouth, and he swallowed it. He Zhaoxi was the first to have a strange feeling. This moment was too fast. This strange feeling did not come from the pill, but from Ding Ning's sword. Ding Ning's sword seemed to be no different from the previous times. Yet, Ding Ning's body seemed to have forced itself forward, and seemed to be about to collide with his long sword. He did not have time to think. Dang! An explosive sound rang out. A wave of shock rose in his heart. Ding Ning's sword was almost at the tip of his sword. In the previous exchanges, Ding Ning's sword had hit the middle of his long sword. But this time, Ding Ning had charged forward and hit the tip of his sword. This change caused him to feel that he could not exert any power. He also felt that he was not holding a sword, but a lever. Ding Ning's figure seemed to be pried up by his power. He flashed up and got closer to him. Boom! At this time, he seemed to hear a wild medicinal power spread through Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning gave a muffled grunt. His body clearly exploded with more power. The remnant sword in his hand gave off more white flowers and cut towards He Zhaoxi's waist. He Zhaoxi's pupils contracted violently, and his breathing stopped completely. He pulled back his sword. Yet his sword was very long. In this close proximity, his long sword was not as nimble as Ding Ning's short sword. In this moment, he only had time to use his sword hilt to knock Ding Ning's blade. The incomparably fierce slash suddenly turned into a clump of scattered dark green weeds. The tip of the sword spun in the air, creating a patch of sword shadows that cut towards He Zhaoxi's fingers. He Zhaoxi's mind was filled with disbelief. Yet he had no choice. He released his fingers and dodged to the side. The withered yellow longsword suddenly lost its master's grip and fell in the air. Ding Ning's dark green remnant sword flicked upwards. This withered yellow flying sword sped up and flew towards the vine forest behind him. He Zhaoxi looked at the withered yellow longsword that landed in the distant forest, and then at the inky green remnant sword blooming with white flowers. He Zhaoxi paused. His eyes flashed with even more shock. Pill sword path. A wave of yellow medicinal energy was still roiling under Ding Ning's skin. Holding the remnant sword, Ding Ning's clothes were ragged, but he looked stronger and more powerful than ever before. Ding Ning saw that He Zhaoxi did not want to fight, so he did not pursue. He nodded at He Zhaoxi and said softly, "Nangong Kaishu gave me this pill before the trial. I have not cultivated the pill sword path." I just received a pill from someone and fought with my life to protect her. Ding Ning, you are a friend worth making. You are a true genius. He Xiaoxi's eyes were filled with bitterness and unwillingness, but true respect appeared on his face. He bowed slightly to Ding Ning and said, I have lost. You ate that yellow quart gold pill at this time? Nangong Tsaishu's shocked voice sounded. The change in this moment was so fast and precise that even she only reacted now. What is going on? Ding Ning ate a pill. He Xiaoxi lost? After she spoke in shock, the viewing platform was in an uproar. The loudest exclamations since the start of the Sword Trial Festival sounded. Duanmu Lian froze. Di Qingmei's face was ashen. Ku Shichuan's disdain froze on his face for a long time. What pill is this that is so powerful? Shui Wangshu did not tear off his beard, but his hands almost tore apart his robes. The expression in his eyes was complicated. Ding Ning had given him a great surprise, other than the fact that when the pill entered his mouth, he was like a swordsman who cultivated the pill path. Even his sword moves had completely defeated He Xiaoxi. Ding Ning had appeared to be fighting hard, but he had been grasping He Xiaoxi's sword moves and thinking carefully about how to defeat them. If people had doubted Ding Ning's talent before, starting from this battle, everyone would realize that Ding Ning possessed astounding talent in many areas. But the greater one's talent, the more they could not be squandered. He was very worried that this powerful pill of unknown origin would bring unfavorable consequences to Ding Ning. Xie Changshen gaped again, unable to speak for a long time. How admirable! It wasn't until Su Heshan, who was beside him, said such a sentence that he completely came back to his senses. Thank you. Xie Changshen felt slightly ashamed, but he also thanked Ku Shichuan seriously. Ku Shichuan looked in shock at him, not knowing why he was thanking him. Every time you openly talk about how he can't do it, he will have a surprising performance. So I thank you. Xie Changshen looked at him and explained, so you can talk more about how he can't do it. Ku Shichuan's expression suddenly turned ashen. Do not mess around. Childish. Xie Rou shouted sternly. She looked as if she wanted to slap Xie Changshen, but at this moment there was an indescribable joy flowing between her brows. It is not time to be happy, but at this time Su Heshan's grave voice sounded. Su Qin. Xie Changshen suddenly turned his head, and his expression changed dramatically. Su Qin's gaze suddenly turned cold, so cold it seemed like ice would form in his eyes. The smile on Ding Ning's face did not change. He nodded to the figure rushing over and said, Eldest senior brother, why are you here? On the viewing platform, Xie Changshen sighed in relief. No matter how he looked at it, Zhang Yi did not look like he wanted to make trouble for Ding Ning. Beside him, Su Heshan also relaxed slightly, but his expression was still serious. While He Xiaoxi, Nangong Kaishu, and Ding Ning had fought for a long time in this place, the formations here were soundproof. The fact that Su Qin and Zhang Yi could come in succession meant that He Xiaoxi's power was astounding, and the commotion was too great. The other White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy students did not come because they felt they could not match and hid further away. Even he felt it was a pity that He Xiaoxi had lost here and could not win in the end. But from another perspective, it showed how difficult it would be for Ding Ning to win against He Xiaoxi. Zhang Yi glanced at Ding Ning's ragged clothes and bloodstained appearance. He was immediately apologetic and said in self-reproach and shock, I had not expected little sect brother to be a step slower. How come Su Qin's words make it sound like you won? Ding Ning coughed softly and said, I came to take advantage. If it was a fair fight outside, it would not be certain. He Xiaoxi frowned when he heard this. He said seriously, I did not take advantage. You won, I accept my loss. Su Qin's expression grew colder. He looked at Zhang Yi and slowly said, He Xiaoxi has lost. If we can take care of these two, you and I will be the top two in this sword trial festival. You really want to protect them? Zhang Yi looked strangely at him and said matter-of-factly, How can a temporary victory be more important than friendship? Su Qin sneered. What if I do not want to listen to you and want to steal their tokens? Zhang Yi said seriously, Then I will do my best to stop you. At this time, Ding Ning suddenly interrupted. Eldest sect brother, who is stronger between you and this second sect brother? Nangong Kaishu suddenly wanted to laugh. First, she felt that Zhang Yi was very interesting. He was indeed the kind of gentleman who was gentle and not angry, just a little pedantic, just as the legend said. Second, when Ding Ning said second senior brother, he emphasized the word second a little, which made the title second senior brother sound completely wrong. Zhang Yi also heard that this title was not right. His expression was slightly awkward, and he frowned slightly, but his figure moved closer to Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu and blocked them. Su Qin glanced coldly at Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu. Then he turned away and left. There are still many enemies. I do not want to fight you to the point where both of us are injured. But according to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, we are not allowed to travel together. Zhang Yi, I do not believe you can protect them in the next 2 days. His cold and murderous voice floated out of the blue mist and into the ears of Zhang Yi, Ding Ning, and the others. Junior sect brother, this is venting your personal anger. Listen to senior sect brother's advice. Being arrogant and jealous of talent is a great taboo in cultivation. Zhang Yi said worriedly to Su Qin's back. Su Qin's figure disappeared into the mist, and no response was heard. Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu could not help but exchange a glance. Eldest senior brother, do you mean what you say? Ding Ning asked suspiciously. Zhang Yi turned around and looked strangely at Ding Ning. Of course I am sincere. Little sect brother, why do you ask? It seems that senior sect brother is a gentleman. Ding Ning said with a smile, I am gauging the heart of a gentleman with my own pettiness. I thought that eldest sect brother was purposefully angering him. Zhang Yi was shocked. I truly hope that he can change. Otherwise, his future is uncertain. How can I purposefully anger him? Seeing old from 3. A hint of emotion appeared in Ding Ning's eyes. It is most likely hard to change a person's nature. He Xiaoxi did not want to waste time. Especially if he lost, he would lose some rewards. He had to treasure his time. He looked at the string of tokens at his waist. His gaze flashed slightly, and he started to take off his clothes. His actions stunned Ding Ning and Zhang Yi. What are you doing? Ding Ning looked dazedly at He Xiaoxi, who had taken off his outer robe and was bare-chested. Your robe is too tattered, and you are injured. It will be cold at night in the mountains and difficult to endure. Also, it is not elegant to be more tattered. In any case, I am going out and have a change of clothes outside. He Xiaoxi casually threw his outer robe to Ding Ning. Ding Ning smiled awkwardly. It seemed that he had thought too much. He Xiaoxi did not have any strange habits. But even if you want to give me clothes, you do not have to take them off in front of me. You should at least care that there are girls present. Nangong Saishu's voice sounded. She looked at He Xiaoxi and said with displeasure. He Xiaoxi's expression froze slightly. He softly defended himself. I thought that it would be more convenient for you to turn around than for me to find a place to take off my clothes. Also, I do not want to waste time. Why should I turn around? Nangong Kaishu glanced at him. Because your figure is very good. He Xiaoxi's expression froze, and a rare blush appeared on his face. He coughed softly As though he could not think of a reply, with a step, he turned and fled into the vine forest behind him. They say that words can stop 100,000 swords. Mist Saishu's words today have opened my eyes. Zhang Yi's face was also slightly stiff. Chapter 75. Only when Nangong Kaishu laughed happily did the shock on the viewing platform dissipate. No one had thought that he Zhaoxi, the strongest of the Green Vine Sword Academy, would be defeated on this day, and the one to defeat him was Ding Ning. But for the people of Changling, the shock today was fated to be even stronger. The tall turrets and the exceptionally straight streets of Changling showed their usefulness today. The orders from the tall turrets and the enormous crossbows accurately pointed out the path of the galloping carriage. Many soldiers and chariots ran along the straight streets as fast as they could, and blocked the path of the carriage ahead of time. But the carriage was only fast, moving in a straight line towards a section of the Wei River at its fastest speed. Before the formation chariots and the heavy armored soldiers had reached a certain scale, there was nothing that could stop the carriage. There was nothing that could stop the white figure that was surrounded by sparkling and translucent streams of water. The heavy seal chariots were pushed aside by the enormous waves and smashed into the houses and shops on the sides. The fearless, heavily armored soldiers were harvested like rice in autumn. The Changling people in the distance did not know what was happening. They only saw the dust on both sides of the carriage's path. It was like a serpent had entered Changling from the Wei River and was rushing back at its fastest speed. On a turret near the huge wave of dust, a general of the Tiger Wolf Army looked so gloomy that water was about to drip out. Send the order, the Tiger Wolf Army along the way, do not fill in. He almost roared out those words. Hearing his military order, a deputy general next to him couldn't help but tremble. He knew that the great cultivators in Changling would not be able to arrive in time, and the Tiger Wolf Army would not be able to get into formation. More reinforcements would only result in more deaths. Yet he also knew that such a great rebel charging out of Changling was a slap to the faces of all the nobility of the Qin dynasty. Even if they went up, they would not be able to stop this person from charging towards the Wei River. But if he ordered the troops to advance now, he would likely have to bear the anger of the nobility in the future. What are you hesitating for? Seeing that the deputy general beside him hadn't passed down the order, the Tiger Wolf Army general roared again with a gloomy face. Today's matter. If we have to bear the brunt of the anger, it won't be us who will stand in the front. Moreover, for me, the lives of my subordinates are more important than some face. If you cannot stop him, you should know the consequences of Bai Shanshui charging out of Changling like this. The coachman is one of the true disciples of Cloudwater Palace, Fan Zhua. Our Divinity Bureau has been following him for several months in order to obtain more clues from him, especially to find Bai Shanshui's exact whereabouts. Not to mention that we haven't discovered Bai Shanshui's presence here. Even if we did, we would have to rely on Bureau Chief Yi and the Marquis's strength to close the net. In the alley in front of the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall, Mo Qinggong had arrived. He squatted in front of the Changling Guard general who had fallen to the ground and said darkly, "Now, even if you die, you have to explain why the Changling Guard has come here and why you have made trouble for this caravan." The Changling Guard general who had fallen to the ground smiled bitterly and said softly with difficulty, "We came here because we discovered that someone was secretly selling the Chu-made gold toad. That was an item from the suspected tomb of the previous emperor that was stolen many years ago. The clues we found were that suspicious people might be in this caravan. Who would have thought it would involve a great rebel like Bai Shanshui?" Mo Qinggong's face turned black, and he was unable to speak. The people of Cloudwater Palace could not be related to the grave robbers from more than a decade ago. Yet there was a clue that led to this place. He was almost instinctively certain that some powerful person was behind this. Without the tiger wolf army fighting to the death along the way, the carriage ran faster and faster. More water vapor gathered towards the carriage from all directions. When they passed through the streets of Chongling, the entire carriage was wrapped in white clouds and water vapor. Adding on the wind, it did not look like a carriage from a distance, but a carriage moving through the clouds. When they reached the shore of the Wei River that was closest to the Zhejiang Commandery Hall, the two galloping horses saw the rolling waves on the vast river and instinctively wanted to stop. However, the middle-aged driver clapped his hands. The two galloping horses gave a sorrowful cry, but they could not stop. Instead, they charged forward even faster. There was a loud bang. The carriage jumped high into the air and crashed into the river, creating astounding waves. The sturdy carriage could not withstand such a collision and immediately split into pieces of various sizes. The man driving the carriage stood on one of the pieces of the carriage, and the white figure easily stood on the water. Only now did he reveal his true appearance. He was dressed in a white fur robe with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His appearance was extremely handsome, as if he was a delicate young master from a wealthy family. His skin was as white as cream. Time had not left any traces on his face. He looked to be in his 20s. It was impossible to connect him with the sword hero by Shan Shui, who had lived in the wilderness for 10 years in order to practice the sword and avoid the pursuit of the cultivators of the Qin dynasty after the Wei dynasty was destroyed. What was even more shocking was that a whirlpool with a radius of dozens of feet surged up not far from his feet. A white shadow swam out from the deep water. Vaguely, it looked like a white carp with a length of dozens of feet. It firmly connected by Shan Shui and Fan Zhu on its back. It was also at this moment that the sound of stormy waves could be heard from the distant port. An enormous armored ship sailed out of the harbor at astounding speed. This giant iron ship was covered in scars and dyed in various colors. It even gave the impression of a giant coral that had emerged from the deep sea. However, this seemingly ancient iron ship was emitting an unimaginable bloody aura, as if it was about to dye the entire surface of the vast and mighty river red. The bow at the front of the ship was a real turtle dragon beast. Red light shot out from the two blood-red eyes of the Ao dragon's head, frightening one's soul. And on top of it stood a white-clothed woman. Her clothes fluttered like a god. Bai Shan Shui did not panic. The white carp under his feet made a half circle and created a white arc. He looked at the divine-like woman in white and said with a smile, "Bureau Chief Yi is as beautiful as expected. I am looking forward to seeing the true cloud water art of our cloud water palace and Bureau Chief Ye's one sky water meet. Pity you came a bit late." The one standing on the turtle dragon's head was naturally Yi Sealing. Her expression was calm as she said, "Coolly, I have to come even if I leave. I will definitely see Mr. again in the future." Bai Shan Shui put away his smile and said seriously, "I see that Bureau Chief Yi may not be happy in Chongling. Why don't you leave Chongling and travel with me? Wouldn't it be great to travel through the rivers and seas? The scene is beautiful, but you don't even dare to let me get close to you. How can we travel together?" Yi Sealing said with slight disdain. "If you can really let go of your emotions, you will not come to Chongling again and will not sing and have sword energies in Chongling." "You are right. Of course, I cannot let go of my old country and soul. But just now, I have not finished speaking." Bai Shan Shui smiled and said, "Of course it is great to sing and travel, but for cultivators like us, fighting against the heavens, fighting against those with millions of soldiers, is that not a happier thing? Also, you once learned the sword from that person. Even if you just want to be safe, how can you be safe in Chongling?" Yi Sealing looked up at the sky. The clear sky above her immediately became filled with dark clouds. I have my reasons for being in Changling, but you cannot understand, she said coldly with an expressionless face, not caring if Bai Shanshui could hear her clearly. Our aspirations are different. Our paths are not the same. Since that is the case, then farewell. Bai Shanshui smiled slightly and nodded in greeting. The long tail of the white carp under his feet struck out a huge wave. In an instant, it cut through the river surface and swam at an astonishing speed. In just a few dozen breaths of time, the figures of Bai Shanshui and Fan Zhua had already become two small dots on the distant river surface. No matter how fast the light boat was, it could not catch up. Only the light song of rebellion came in the wind. Outside Fish Market, on the shore of the Wei River, the red-robed woman, who rarely walked out of Fish Market, had a thin black veil over her face as she watched the two black dots leave. Next to her stood the hunchbacked old man with the black bamboo staff. Hearing the faint singing, her unusually calm voice sounded. "Uncle Sun, do you see? The biggest problem in Changling is that people are not united. When something happens, they will fail because of their family. Then many people will have to take the blame. They will die for the sake of Changling and the Qin dynasty's face and progress. It was not easy to find someone who could suppress them, but he was killed by his own people." The hunchbacked old man did not look up. He did not speak and only hummed. It was unknown whether he was laughing or crying. Chapter 76. Night-shrouded Changling. The stars flashed, and white frost started to form in the mountains as though the white frost was formed from the falling starlight. Ding Ning lay on a simple hammock made from some vines, but did not feel cold at all. The wind and snow he usually endured in the falling parasol wine shop was colder than the cold of autumn. He had a certain understanding of many of the cultivation methods of the Han, Zhao, and Wei kingdoms. However, he did not know much about the cultivation methods and pills of some of the smaller sects that were not mainstream or had taken a different path. But today, Nangong Caishu's yellow quart gold pill from a small sect gave him a great surprise. He closed his eyes tightly and looked inside with his consciousness. He refined the medicinal power that filled his body. Countless little silkworms seemed to have burrowed out of his flesh and blood and slowly swallowed the impurities in the medicinal power that were harmful to cultivators. Because the devouring was extremely slow and gentle, his surroundings were completely silent. Even the impurities in his physical energy that had merged into his flesh and blood were slowly swallowed up. As time slowly passed, the remaining medicinal power in Ding Ning's body grew purer. It was so pure that even the best pills of the South Sun pill sect of the past could not reach this level. The extremely pure medicinal energy and the extremely pure true qi slowly merged, and the true qi in his qi si became more and more viscous and heavy. The threads of physical energy that flowed out of his energy seep passed through many of the previously impenetrable tendons in his body and seeped into his bones. This was Realm 2 energy refinement, second-class bone washing. Nangong Caishu was right. This yellow quart gold pill was enough for an energy refinement third-class cultivator to reach energy refinement second-class. But at this time, Ding Ning's cultivation did not stop advancing. After being swallowed by the countless little silkworms in his body, some of the beneficial medicinal power that had been tightly mixed with the impurities were washed out. The medicinal power of this yellow quart gold pill was used to its fullest potential. At this time, there was still a lot of pure medicinal energy left in his body. So he continued to refine it. His Zhen Qi became even more condensed and heavy, penetrating even deeper, nourishing the places where even his consciousness could not reach before. The night gradually passed. When the first ray of morning light fell on the peak of the mountain, the last of the medicinal power in his body had disappeared. his consciousness stopped in front of the marrow river in the bones that the cultivation practitioners had mentioned. He was only a little bit away from the second realm, superior grade, marrow transformation. Ding-Ning opened his eyes. Facing the rising sun, he took a deep breath of fresh air. He was very satisfied with the speed of his cultivation advancement, or rather, he was very satisfied with the control he had over his cultivation advancement. According to the rules, they could start their journey in the second half of the night. However, this was not the third day that would determine the outcome of the battle, so there was no point in rushing ahead early. Furthermore, who knew how many dangers were hidden in this kind of magic formation at night? Therefore, all the students who still had the qualifications to continue the trial chose to act after sunrise. A disciple of the Green Vine Sword Academy was roasting a skylark. Beside him were some dried wild oranges. These were obviously the breakfast he had prepared for himself. However, at this moment, his body suddenly stiffened. He quickly stood up, and his right hand landed on the sword at his waist. "I advise you not to draw your sword." Following this cold voice, Su Qin's figure slowly passed out of the thin mist at the side. "Especially when I may not want to use my sword against you." He looked at this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple and slowly added, "If I remember correctly, you should be called Shurxia and the most recent disciple. You come from Changshan Commandery and use the Blue Frost Sword. You only have energy, refinement, second-class cultivation. You have performed well to reach this place and survive this long night, but you are not a match for me." This Green Vine Sword Academy disciple, who had a young face and looked just slightly taller than Ding-Ning, had even greater terror and shock in his eyes. He was just an ordinary disciple of the Green Vine Sword Academy. It was a surprise that ordinary people of White Goat Cave would notice his existence and remember his name. However, Su Qin not only remembered his name, but also his birth and cultivation. Su Qin's great memory was just as the legends said. "I am Shurxia." He swallowed hard and tried to calm himself down. "But I do not understand why Senior Sect Brother Su Qin appeared in front of me and did not want to use his sword against me. Does Senior Sect Brother Su Qin feel that my cultivation is not worthy of you using your sword?" Su Qin smiled slightly and shook his head. He said, "I mean, you may have a better choice." Shurxia looked at the skylark that was slightly charred on one side because it had not been flipped. He asked, "What choice?" According to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, there must be at least one battle each day. You should not have experienced any battle today. Su Qin said coolly, "The choice I give you is to fight me or fight Ding-Ning, who is not far from here. You should know that he has just entered energy refinement. You may win against him. I can even guarantee that you will be able to successfully approach him." Shurxia stilled and looked in disbelief at Su Qin. He said in shock, "Why, there are many reasons to have a person withdraw, but I do not think that I need to explain much to you." Su Qin glanced at him and said, "You only need to make your choice. Choose to immediately lose to my sword or defeat him and obtain more trial time. For disciples like you, the meaning of participating in a trial like this is just to obtain more experience." "What does Su Qin want to do?" Xie Changsheng, who was still sleepy, looked at the situation in the Sword Trial Valley and asked in a cold voice, blinking his eyes. "This is a method to chase away beasts." Xie Ro glanced at him and explained softly with a frown, "Some of the hunters in Ba Commandery are able to capture prey that is several times stronger than them. They surround some mountains or river valleys and chase away some wild beasts. Some of the ferocious beasts are forced into a narrow path and kill each other when they meet. Su Qin is restrained by Zhang Yi and cannot act. He chose to restrain Zhang Yi and force others to fight Ding-Ning." Xie Changxing's expression changed. He could not help but curse. This person is shameless. All warfare is cunning, and the fittest survive. Next to him, Su Hashan said gravely, in this trial, other than strength, it is also a competition of strategy. Su Qin is shameless, but he is, as the rumors say, he is quick-witted and changes quickly. Seeing Shi Xia get closer and closer to Ding Ning, Xiero's frown deepened. But for some reason, today's Ding Ning gave her a different feeling than yesterday. Ding Ning was chewing on a few pieces of orange. There were many wild orange trees in the forest, and it was not far from the time when these wild oranges ripened. Many of the oranges were dry, but they were hanging from the branches. It was easy to pick some. But these wild oranges did not taste good, especially in the early morning. When chewed and drunk like water, it tasted sour. When Ding Ning was so sore that his teeth were a little soft, he saw Shi Xia, who was walking over with her head slightly lowered. He felt Shi Xia's expression was strange, so he rubbed his cheeks and looked at Shi Xia, who slowly walked over. He was not the first to speak. I am called Shi Xia. I am a student who entered Green Vine Sword Academy last year. Shi Xia stopped dozens of feet away from him and said, I have come to fight you, but this time I was forced to come by White Goat Cave's senior sect brother, Su Qin. Ding Ning stilled slightly. Shi Xia continued, I know this isn't very good, but I want more opportunities to gain experience, so I want to be able to fight with more people in this trial and stay for a longer period of time. So I have no other choice. Ding Ning smiled slightly and said sincerely, this is what I should do. If it was me, I would make the same choice. Shi Xia looked gratefully at Ding Ning and then said, I heard that junior sect brother Ding Ning's understanding of the sword manual is not bad, but you have just reached energy refinement before coming to the sword trial festival. So when we fight later, I will try to control my power to energy refinement second class. Ding Ning felt more and more that this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple was interesting. He laughed again. Originally, there was no need. But if you think this way, I think you will have more opportunities to train. Shi Xia felt that he did not understand Ding Ning's words, but he had finished what he wanted to say, so he did not say anything else. He bowed to Ding Ning and then started to attack. His sword was green in color. It was made of a kind of hard jade, and there were some seemingly messy and fine runes on it. As his true qi continued to surge, the blade of the sword began to emit a biting cold, and layers of blue frost began to condense on it. Ding Ning smiled slightly. He slowly attacked as well. Many little jasmine-like white flowers appeared on the blade. It looked no different from yesterday. Ding Ning's body was immediately filled with dense, inky green sword shadows. These sword shadows stopped a foot or two in front of him. Because the viewing platform could not hear the sound of the two swords colliding, it felt as though the two swords had not truly touched in the next dozen breaths. Yet, from the layers of sparks that bloomed in the air like golden dandelions, it was possible to know that the two swords had been colliding in these dozen breaths. Shi Xia seems to have suppressed his cultivation. He does not want to have an advantage in power. Right now, the two are competing purely in sword skill, Xie Changxing said softly with a frown. Su Hashan said in an admiring tone, Ding Ning is very good. The most important part of the Green Vine Sword Academy's vine sword style is the word coil. If the two swords are close, it is easy to be twisted and sent flying. The frost on Shi Xia's blue frost sword has the effect of cleansing and is even more adhesive. However, Ding Ning's every strike is using the tip of his sword against the tip of his sword or the body of his sword against the tip of his sword. Even in response to Shi Xia's slapping sword moves, he does not give the other sword a chance to come close. His sword is actually very good. Xie Ro nodded and said softly, while it is incomplete, The power after the infusion of physical energy is not weak. The blade is short, but it is very suitable for complex and dense sword moves like the wildfire sword, which can quickly change in short distances. I take back the saying that this is a broken sword. Xie Changsheng looked gravely at Ding Ning's sword and said, but Ding Ning is completely on the defense. How can he win? Su Heshan said solemnly, as long as one has enough patience and does not make a mistake, the opponent can make a mistake. The respect in Shurxia's eyes grew stronger, looking at Ding Ning's calm gaze and his sword moves that were becoming more and more precise and skilled. He even felt that he had become a training target. He knew that he had to use an even stronger sword move to have a chance of winning against Ding Ning. He took a deep breath. As he sent out the sword in his hand again, his left hand that had been secretly accumulating power hit the hilt of the blue frost sword with astounding speed. A wave of energy flowed along the hilt and exploded along the blade. There was a soft crack. The frost on the blue frost sword had grown thicker and thicker until it became a hard shell of frost. Now, these frost shells split open like 4 or 5 sharp sword fragments, shooting forward. These frost shells were thin and sharp, unlike the fallen leaves that He Zhaoxi had swept up previously. If one was hit by any of the frost shells, it was no different from being stabbed by a thin sword. Many people on the viewing platform narrowed their eyes. This sword was clearly the key to victory. Ding Ning's expression was still calm. He was certain that if it had been him, just now, he might not have been able to dodge Shurxia's attack, much less launch such a satisfying counterattack and win. Su Heshan and Xie Ro were silent. While they hoped that Ding Ning could win, Ding Ning's perfect victory in a pure competition of sword skills still gave them a great shock. Shurxia's mind was slightly blank. He could not believe that Ding Ning had defeated him like this. But after a long while, he recovered. He glanced at his right shoulder. He knew just now, if Ding Ning's sword had come down, even without any physical energy, it would have been enough to cut off his right arm. I have lost. He bowed to Ding Ning in admiration. Junior sect brother Ding Ning, your sword skills are exquisite, and ordinary people cannot compare. Principal D, are you satisfied with Ding Ning's performance? On the viewing platform, Shui Wangshu, covered in a thin blanket, stroked his beard and smiled as he spoke to Di Qingmei. Di Qingmei wanted to maintain his calm, but his brows could not help but tremble. In the end, his face was ashen. Do not have such an ugly expression. But Shui Wangshu looked calmly at him and said softly, no matter what you think of me, White Goat and Green Vine are one. In the future, you and I may have more glory because we have a disciple like this. Di Qingmei's heart suddenly shook. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Shui Wangshu. Shui Wangshu smiled faintly and looked at the white clouds in the sky. He said softly with slight sadness, White Goat Cave is fated to not exist. The more you care about this competition, the more you remind others that White Goat Cave still exists. You should change your position and think. Ding Ning is my student, but he can also be your student. If one is not broad-minded and cannot even tolerate this sky, how can one tolerate these mountains and move these distant mountains? Shui Wangshu said coolly after a pause. Di Qingmei's heart suddenly beat rapidly, and his hands started to tremble. Chapter 78. Di Qingmei was not an ordinary person. Shui Wangshu's words gave him, who had been at the door of Realm 7 for many years, many insights. His hands trembled as he asked in an incredulous tone, why are you telling me this? Do not forget, both White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy first belonged to the Qin dynasty. No matter what identity you and I have, we are first of the Qin people. Shui Wangshu glanced at Di Qingmei and said calmly, "His Majesty and the Empress can tolerate me and my senior sect brother because they know we will first put ourselves in the position of the Qin people. When necessary, our swords will always face the enemies of the Qin dynasty. As to cultivation, at my age, I do not fear being surpassed or overtaken. My enemy can only be myself and my age." Di Qingmei's hands trembled even more violently. He felt he was very small under his robes. He felt Xue Wangshu, who was looking at the distant mountains, seemed to be one with the sky and the distant mountains. "Xue Wangshu, I am not as good as you." When his hands stopped trembling, he lowered his head and said softly, "That may not be the case." Xue Wangshu said calmly, "My path is almost at the end, but your path is still far. The future will depend on how you walk." In the sword trial valley, Shi Xia, who had accepted his defeat, took off the token hanging from his waist and was about to hand it to Ding Ning. "So fragrant!" But at this time Ding Ning sniffed and said, "Do you smell it?" Shi Xia stilled. He took a few deep breaths and felt carefully. There seemed to be a faint fragrance of roasted meat. This was definitely not the half-burnt skylark that he had just eaten. Instead, it was the aroma of roasted meat that was full of oil. "Do you want to go and see?" Looking at Ding Ning's expression, Shi Xia could not help but remind him kindly, "That may be a trap. You have already won against me today. You only need to reach the designated area to pass." Ding Ning chuckled and said, "Although I ate a few wild oranges, eating this kind of sour thing on an empty stomach makes my stomach churn constantly. It's very uncomfortable. I must have something solid to fill my stomach so that I can have enough strength." Shi Xia had always placed himself and Ding Ning in the position of the weak. He had never thought that Ding Ning would choose to smell the fragrance and take the initiative to find an opponent. Thinking of the possible fierce battle that awaited Ding Ning, and the exquisite sword moves that Ding Ning had displayed just now, his gaze suddenly became fervent. He could not help but blurt out, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, can I go with you to take a look?" Ding Ning glanced at him and smiled. "I have no objections. I just don't know if the teachers of your Green Vine Sword Academy will have any objections. After all, this kind of trial prohibits two people from traveling together." As if waking from a dream, Shi Xia threw the token to Ding Ning and said, "I admit defeat first, so I will not be considered traveling together. If a teacher wants me to leave the valley immediately, I will ask him to give me some time. After all, it will take a lot of time to rush back to the observation platform. I may miss a lot of things." Ding Ning smiled slightly and did not speak. He started to move towards the direction of the fragrance. Shi Xia was afraid that being too close to Ding Ning would affect the trial, so he only followed Ding Ning from a distance. After passing through several vine walls, he was even more shocked. Only now did he smell a clear fragrance in the wind. Ding Ning's sense of smell seemed to be many times more sensitive than his. Some orange color appeared in front of Ding Ning, but the orange color was very bright. Unlike the dry and dark color of wild oranges, it was a wild persimmon tree. Looking at the ripe persimmons that still had some frost on their skin, Ding Ning smiled in satisfaction. He nodded to the person under the tree and said, "Chongling says that frosted red persimmons are as sweet as honey. In the past, I loved to eat this kind of persimmons the most. Senior sect brother, Yiming really knows how to find a place." The person sitting under the wild persimmon tree with many red persimmons was dressed in the robes of White Goat Cave. He looked to be 4 or 5 years older than Ding Ning. It was Yiming who had been waiting at the gates of White Goat Cave when Ding Ning had first entered White Goat Cave. At this time, he was sitting on a rock under the wild persimmon tree, roasting a wild boar leg. Next to the fire was the black wild boar, with one leg cut off. This was a leisurely and well-fed scene. But when he heard Ding Ning say this, Yi Ming frowned and did not know what to say. When he walked closer and saw his expression, Ding Ning laughed again. You were forced by senior sect Brother Su Qin to purposefully wait for me here. Yi Ming was shocked. Junior sect Brother Ding Ning, how do you know? Ding Ning pointed at the thin mist behind him. Because there is a precedent. Yi Ming finally saw that there was a Green Vine Sword School disciple there, and stilled. He is called Shi Xia, a student of Green Vine Sword Academy. I won against him, and he came with me to see. Ding Ning said directly, and then rubbed his stomach. He looked at the golden wild boar leg in Yi Ming's hand and said seriously, my stomach is uncomfortable right now. Senior sect brother, Yi Ming, why don't you treat me to something to eat first? The shock in Yi Ming's eyes grew, but then he hesitated. Did senior sect brother Su Qin hunt this as well? But this does not matter. Regardless of whether you win or I win, will he be merciful to the winner in the following trials? Ding Ning twisted his lips and seemed to see through Yi Ming's thoughts. He said, what is the big deal about eating his roasted boar leg? Yi Ming thought, and then said, that is reasonable. Junior sect brother Ding Ning, please. The wild boar meat in the mountains is very fragrant. Senior sect brother is very good at roasting meat. It is a pity you lack some salt and can only use this persimmon to adjust the flavor. One side is hot and greasy. The other side is raw, cold, fresh, and sweet. You eat meat and persimmon. Be careful of diarrhea. No matter. He Xiaoxi ate a lot of raw meat and did not have diarrhea. His example tells me that intense exercise can strengthen the stomach. In any case, I am going to fight with senior sect brother later. He Xiaoxi? You have seen He Xiaoxi? Yes, he lost to me. Didn't senior sect brother Su Qin tell you? Yi Ming's brow slowly furrowed. He looked at Ding Ning, who had cut off half of the boar leg. His expression grew more serious. He finally could not help but say, Junior sect brother Ding Ning, I know you have extraordinary talent, but a person must be honest. You are so young. How can you think of making such a lie to scare me? You think this will scare me? Ding Ning looked up. His gaze moved from the half of the wild persimmon in his hand to Yi Ming's serious face. He said helplessly, Senior sect brother Yi Ming, I am speaking the truth. You still do not know how to repent. Yi Ming's expression grew uglier. He put down the boar bone in his hand and slowly stood up. Since this is the case, then let me see how strong junior sect brother's sword is. Ding Ning looked seriously at him and protested, I am not full yet. Yi Ming took a deep breath and said, it is not good to eat too much. Also, according to what you said, there are people waiting to see your fight. Ding Ning wiped his hands and suddenly thought of something. He said, Senior sect brother Yi Ming, actually, the robes I am wearing right now are He Xiaoxi's. I do not know where you got this Green Vine Sword Academy robe, but you think this can scare me? What Ding Ning did not expect was that Yi Ming grew even more furious. He shouted, you think I can believe you can beat He Xiaoxi to the ground and take off his robes? That scene was so beautiful that Ding Ning did not dare to imagine it. So he reluctantly stood up and walked to the empty space at the side. He helplessly pulled out the last flower remnant sword and said to Yi Ming, Senior sect brother, Yi Ming, please. Yi Ming pulled out the long sword on his back with a dark expression. Knowing that Ding Ning cultivated the wildfire sword manual that focused on defense, he did not speak. His figure flickered, and his sword went to the center and stabbed towards Ding Ning's chest. This attack was unusually simple. His sword was the most ordinary black iron sword of the Qin dynasty. There was only a seal script on the center of the sword that stretched straight to the tip. This seal script could only turn the vital energy inside into sword energy and charge out from the tip of the sword. Chapter 79. Ding Ning took a step forward, and the remnant sword with tiny white flowers cut towards Yi Ming's wrist. Because he had been forced back a step, Ding Ning's counterattack was not fast. But because Yi Ming was too shocked, his movements were even slower. He wanted to pull back his sword, but in this moment, he found that Ding Ning's sword was already cutting towards his fingers. At such a short distance, he did not have time to make any more changes, so he could only let go and abandon his sword. Ding Ning's sword hit the hilt of his sword, causing the sword to fly to the side, and out of Yi Ming's range of control. Then he stopped and did not attack. He looked apologetically at Yi Ming and said, "Apologies, senior sect brother Yi Ming." Because he was too shocked, Yi Ming did not care that Ding Ning had defeated him while he was distracted. He looked with wide eyes at Ding Ning and asked again, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, you just had a breakthrough. How come your cultivation is close to energy, refinement, first class?" Ding Ning could understand his emotions and explained calmly, "Nangong Kaishu gave me a pill medicine. I swallowed it when I was fighting He Zhaoxi, so I had such a cultivation advancement." He really won against He Zhaoxi? Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning should have only met when they were cultivating in the library cave. The two had such a relationship that she even gave Ding Ning a pill medicine that could increase cultivation. Yi Ming started to believe that Ding Ning's words were true. He looked dazedly at Ding Ning and could not help but say, "No wonder you rejected Xia Ro without hesitation. So it is because of Nangong Kaishu." Hearing this, Ding Ning had a bitter expression and said, "Senior sect brother Yi Ming, your thoughts and considerations are too jumpy. I cannot have a good conversation with you like this. It's only now that I understand the meaning of your words." Shixia walked to Ding Ning's side and bowed seriously to Ding Ning. She said softly, "When I fought with you earlier, I said that I would do my best to control my strength to the low level of qi refining. You said that if I did that, I would have more opportunities to train. It turns out that your true cultivation is already above mine. If both of us use our full strength, you will be able to defeat me very quickly and easily. However, you also intentionally suppressed your strength to the low level of qi refining to fight me. Through a pure contest of sword skills with me, I learned a lot, so I have to thank you." Ding Ning said calmly, "I made that choice because you made that choice first, so you don't have to thank me." Shixia bowed once more. Without saying anything more, he turned around and left. "You defeated him with just your sword skills?" Yi Ming looked at the departing Shixia with an expression of disbelief. "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, it has only been a month. How did you cultivate?" "Senior sect brother, you have too many questions. I can't explain it to you right now. Why don't you go to the viewing platform and ask me what happened?" Ding Ning really couldn't take it anymore. He reached out to Yi Ming and said, "Give me the token." Not far from where Ding Ning and Yi Ming were fighting, Zhang Yi and Su Qin stood on top of two old pine trees covered in vines. Junior sect brother Ding Ning is indeed a 1 in a million genius. As senior sect brothers, we should do our best to help him. How can we plot against him?" Seeing Yi Ming hand over the token and leave, Zhang Yi turned around and tried to persuade Su Qin, whose face was as cold as water. Su Qin glanced at him coldly. His figure moved, and he swept down from the old pine tree and was about to leave. Zhang Yi was finally a little annoyed. He stomped his feet, and the old pine tree under his feet was instantly shaken into innumerable dry needles that flew out. "Junior sect brother Su Qin, what are you thinking?" he said angrily. Su Qin turned to look at him and said with a cold smile, "It's not the first day, you know me. You should know that I, Su Qin, have never given up halfway." Don't think about driving anyone to fight junior sect brother Ding Ning. Zhang Yi floated up from the old pine tree and landed not far from Su Qin. He said word by word, "I will never allow you to do that." Su Qin's eyebrows rose up. Zhang Yi looked at him and said with a determined expression, "If you act like this again, I will act. You will protect him even at the risk of not being able to win in the end." Su Qin was silent for a moment and said with slight disdain, "If that is the case, then I will let him stay for one more day." Sensing the irrevocable meaning in Su Qin's words, Zhang Yi's brow furrowed deeply. Su Qin turned and left. He expressionlessly looked at the fallen leaves at the bottom of his boots. He looked at the fallen leaves that had sunk deep into the mud because of his feet. They would eventually mix with the mud and become a part of the mud. More coldness appeared at the corners of his mouth. He and Zhang Yi had fundamentally different views of Ding Ning and his fellow sect members. Zhang Yi said they had to help each other, but in his eyes, in the world of cultivators, there were only two possibilities: step on people or be stepped on. If they could not step on people to advance, they would slowly rot like these fallen leaves in the mud and become the most ordinary and inconspicuous part. The more conspicuous and extraordinary a person was, such as Zhang Yi and Ding Ning, they had to be stepped on as soon as possible. He envied talent, but did not fear becoming enemies with these people. Because if he feared even the talent of his opponent, what courage would he have to defeat stronger opponents in the future and cross the dangerous barriers on the path of cultivation? 4 pillars of smoke lit up. Su Qin slowly walked towards the area where the 4 pillars of smoke lit up. At the same time, a Green Vine Sword Academy disciple who did not look outstanding and kept a low profile slowly walked towards the direction of the smoke. From time to time, his right hand would reach into his bosom and touch the small sword wrapped in cloth. The presence given off by the sword caused warmth to surge through his body, and he even forgot his hunger and thirst. He was Mo Chun. Suddenly he stopped. A student also dressed in the robes of the Green Vine Sword Academy walked out of the thin mist in front of him. This was a very tall young man. On his back were 2 long swords with golden hilts. "Senior sect brother Mo, I am sorry." Looking at Mo Chun, this youth bowed apologetically and pulled out the 2 long swords on his back. "I have not fought today. Senior sect brother Mo, you should know that there are fewer and fewer opponents. It is not easy to find one." Of course, Mo Chun recognized this youth. This youth was Li Danxia. Other than He Xiaoxi, the Green Vine Sword Academy's most likely person to enter the top 3. While his cultivation was not as high as He Xiaoxi, Zhang Yi, and the others, he had reached Realm 2 and entered Vital Energy Realm. Knowing that this was an opponent he could not defeat with his true strength, Mo Chun took a deep breath. His right hand reached into his bosom and tightly gripped the hilt of the small sword. Then he bowed to Li Danxia and said softly, "Junior sect brother Li, I am sorry." Li Danxia stilled slightly. He thought that Mo Chen's mood was too heavy and disappointed, so he said something wrong. He coughed a little awkwardly and did not say anything more. He raised the 2 swords in his hands and made a gesture of inviting the other to attack. Mo Chen raised his head. His heart beat like a drum, and his eyes flashed with an unprecedented light. This unusual gaze caused Li Danxia to feel a strong sense of unease. Mo Chen took a deep breath. A wave of physical energy flowed out of his energy sea and poured out of his palm without reservation. Li Danxia's pupils contracted violently. The cloth wrapped around the small sword was torn to pieces by Mo Chen's physical energy. The moment the small silver sword was exposed to the air, the physical energy around the small sword was swallowed up by the dense seal scripts. There was a light explosion. The small silver sword emitted countless dazzling rays of light. Countless strands of light floated up like snow-white dandelions. The rapidly expanding aura even shook off the hair tie that Emo-chun was wearing, causing his long black hair to flutter behind him. In this moment, this square-faced student of the Green Vine Sword Academy, who was usually quiet and inconspicuous, gave off a heart-shaking demonic presence. Li Danxia subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Feeling the terrifying presence coming off the other's sword, he poured his vital energy into the two swords in his hands without reservation. The hilts of his two swords were gold, but the blades were crimson red. As his vital energy poured in, patches of gold and crimson red light mixed together. The two swords were like two burning rays of sunset. Emo-chun flew up and swung his sword at the two rays of sunset. As he swung his sword, countless scenes appeared in his mind. He saw the people of the Emo Marquisate establishment completely ignore his existence as they walked by. He saw the Emo family of an city living frugally. He saw the expectant gazes of countless people when he left in city for Chongling. He saw himself running into walls everywhere in Chongling and unable to pass the exams of many of the schools he admired. He saw the shadow of the Emo family covering him. He saw himself helplessly writing letters to Incity's family. He saw the Incity's people begging for many dried medicinal herbs that were originally used to prolong the lives of the elders of the family, decorating them with jade boxes and sending them to the home of an important person in Chongling. He saw himself enter the Green Vine Sword Academy in the end, but achieve nothing. In the end, the scene in front of him was this small sword giving off snowy white dandelions. His heart was filled with injustice. He wanted to cut down those unjust scenes with one blow. The dancing snowy white dandelions and the burning sunset finally met. The color of the sunset in Li Danxia's eyes immediately disappeared. He only saw countless white dandelions flying over. His breathing completely stopped. A huge force surged over, and the two swords in his hands were all broken in the middle. The flying swords instead slashed onto his body. Two streams of blood sprayed out of his body. In the next moment, he uncontrollably retreated more than a dozen steps and sat down on the ground. Also, even if Emo-chun has such a sword, I am certain that there are people in this valley who can defeat him. Moreover, since Emo-chun had such a sword, it meant that he had a wider world ahead of him compared to others. If a disciple like this can get one of the 3 seats, I think it is a good thing. The rewards of the Sword Trial Festival will be of great help to him. The viewing platform became silent again. Everyone pondered Di Qingmei's words and gradually felt that Di Qingmei's decision was not a problem as a sect master and considering the future of the entire sword school. He Zhaoxi's brows slowly relaxed. He bowed slightly to Di Qingmei and did not object. Night once again fell on the sword Trial Valley. The sword Trial Valley once again became peaceful. During the coldest time of the night, many of the spectating students all stood up at the same time, once again gathering on several viewing platforms. A line of smoke that signaled departure lit up. Many sparks rose into the sky in a beautiful sight. A Green Vine Sword Academy, disciples started to run quickly in the darkness. This was the last day. According to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, whoever could reach the exit of the Sword Trial Valley the fastest and obtain a green suet jade placed at the exit would be the final winner. A trial like this naturally required intelligence. So this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple had traveled many miles before entering the designated area in the day and found a safe path to the exit. While this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple had used up a lot of energy during the day and was extremely tired, he was filled with confidence and thought he could reach the exit of the Sword Trial Valley as quickly as possible. However, after running for half the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he suddenly stopped when he saw that he was not far from the Sword Trial Valley. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. In the day, there should have been a passage in front of him. But now, the passage in front of him had disappeared, and there was only an unusually thick wall of vines. After being stunned for a few breaths of time, he walked forward a little, wanting to make sure that he wasn't mistaken. Just a few steps away, the silent wall of vines in front of him suddenly moved. With many hissing sounds, dozens of vines shot out at the same time. "This green vine Sword Academy," disciple shouted in shock. As he swung his sword, there were continuous explosions and sparks. The dozens of vines attacking him were all thick vines with skin as hard as steel. The sword in his hand was knocked away in a breath's time. Under his despairing gaze, dozens of vines surged onto his body at the same time, wrapping him up like a dumpling. A green vine Sword Academy teacher floated down from above. The vines wrapped around this green vine Sword Academy disciple scattered like water. Then the green vine Sword Academy teacher took this green vine Sword Academy disciple who had lost the right to continue fighting and left. After a few dozen breaths of time, the thin mist that had just calmed down surged, and Su Qin's tall figure appeared unhurriedly. He stopped at where this green vine Sword Academy disciple had been and stared at the wall of vines that had not appeared during the day. After confirming that this wall of vines had completely blocked off all the passages leading to the exit of the canyon, and sensing the slow loss of the primal energies of the universe from all the vines in this wall of vines, he was completely at ease. He sat down cross-legged and then closed his eyes to rest. Almost at the same time, Ding Ning arrived at the other side of the wall of vines. He could sense the changes in the primal energies of the universe even more clearly than Su Qin. He could even sense that this wall of vines extended horizontally as though it was connected to the two sides of the mountain. Based on the speed at which the primal energies of the universe were dissipating, this wall of vines would not disappear before tomorrow's noon. So he picked a clean rock nearby and laid down, closing his eyes to sleep and wait for the sunrise. The sky gradually brightened. The darkness gradually faded. When the first ray of light fell into the valley, all the students on the viewing platform who were still awake exclaimed at the same time. These exclamations also woke up the sleeping students. Then, the students who were woken up immediately exclaimed in surprise. All of the light blue mist started to dissipate. Most of the lush vines started to wither and yellow. All of the leaves started to fall. The entire Sword Trial Valley suddenly became clear and bright. Only the wall of vines that was dozens of feet wide and as straight as a city wall still existed on the two sides of the valley. In front of this almost impenetrable wall of vines, there were only 7 figures left. Ding Ning, Nangong Kaishu, Zhang Yi, Su Qin, Mo Chun. Other than these 5, there were 2 other students from the Green Vine Sword Academy, Lu Yongguang and Mu Liunyan. Looking down from above, these 7 people were scattered all over the place. As the surrounding vines withered, it was only then that he could clearly see the positions of the people around him. However, all of them were actually not far from each other. Among them, the closest one was only 100 feet away. It seems that it's time to end it completely. Ding Ning stretched and looked at the people around him. His expression was still calm. It is finally time. A cold smile appeared on Su Qin's face. His gaze swept across everyone and finally stopped on Mo Chen's face. Then, before anyone else could make a move, he was the first to walk towards Mo Chen. What does he want to do? This was a particularly visually impactful day for all the spectators. Many people who had just recovered from their shock looked at Su Qin's actions and couldn't help but speak. First, deal with the weakest in his eyes. This way, including him, there will only be 6 left. Ku Shichuan, who had not spoken for a long time, said coldly, Zhang Yi, Dingning and Nangong Kaishu are clearly on the same side. After he deals with the weakest in his eyes, he will use this to persuade the other two to be on the same side. Xie Changsheng and Su Heshan exchanged a look. While the two of them disliked Ku Shichuan, they felt that Ku Shichuan was right. Pity that Mo Chun is not the soft persimmon he imagines. Xie Changsheng rejoiced and could not help but say softly. Yet the matter did not develop as he had expected. Seeing Su Qin slowly walk towards him, Mo Chun silently raised his head. Then he gripped the small silver sword and started to channel physical energy into it. A surging aura surged out of the small sword in his hand again, blowing his black hair back again, as if countless demons were twisting and dancing in the air. Su Qin immediately stopped, and his eyes flashed with unusual cold light. I want to first fight Ding Ning. Mo Chun looked at the cold light flashing in his eyes and said softly but firmly. Su Qin stilled slightly and then smiled faintly. He said, "That is wonderful." Chapter 81. Mo Chun stilled slightly. He saw something from the smile on Su Qin's face. Su Qin had already turned around. His gaze landed on Lu Yangguang and Mu Liunyan. Then he walked towards Mu. Liunyan smiled slightly and said, "Please." Mu Liunyan's expression turned cold. At the side, Lu Yangguang's face paled slightly. They had been shocked by the power of the snow dandelion sword in Mo Chen's hand. They did not understand what Su Qin meant by challenging someone in a situation like this. In their view, the more impatient a person was, the more exhausted they would be. They would not be able to fight to the end. Senior sect brother Zhang. Ding Ning's gaze moved away from the snow dandelion sword in Mo Chen's hand. He frowned and said softly to Zhang, "If you want to fight, you can fight now. If Su Qin kills Mu Liunyan, he will fight us together with Mo Chun and Lu Yangguang. The three of us are weak. Lu Yangguang should not refuse Su Qin's invitation." Zhang Yi's expression was slightly bitter. He said softly, "Junior sect brother Su Qin is fighting against outsiders. How can I fight against him first? If it is, as you say, then I will fight with all my power and see if I can protect you." Ding Ning stilled. He looked helplessly at him and said seriously, "Senior sect brother Zhang Yi, you are too soft-hearted." Zhang Yi turned to look at him and said sincerely, "Benevolence, righteousness, and friendship are the most important thing for disciples of the same sect. As the eldest Shixiang, whether others can do it or not, I must set an example first." Ding Ning looked at him and thought of a certain person in the past. He grew silent and thought of the wall in his falling parasol wine shop. "You should understand why I have come to find you now." Looking at Mu Liunyan, who had not moved, Su Qin said, "Because you are weaker than the others." His voice was calm, but it could immediately incite people's anger. Mu Liunyan's eyes immediately burned. With a clang, his sword was unsheathed. The blade of his sword was also abnormally straight, but as his fingers tightened on the hilt, there was a soft sound on the blade, and many curved thorns popped out. His sword instantly looked like a fishbone. This was the unique fish spine sword of Yanmen County. Every curved thorn could lock the opponent's sword in battle, preventing the opponent's sword from moving according to the momentum. Without any hesitation, the fish spine sword in Mu Liunyan's hand instantly transformed into dozens of sword shadows, enveloping Su Qin. These dozens of sword shadows were real shadows left behind by the fish spine sword as it rapidly pierced through the air. Furthermore, they left behind real sword chi, making them look like real swords flying through the air. But facing these sword shadows, Su Qin only smiled mockingly. He waved his left hand, and a vigorous true essence flowed into the sword hilt in his hand. The purple sword swung out. "I have a better choice." Ding Ning looked at the three people slowly walking over and said softly, "Senior sect brother Zhang, you go deal with Mo Chen. Nangong Kaishu, you go deal with Lu Yangguang." Zhang Yi and Nangong Kaishu stilled and asked in unison, "What about you?" Ding Ning looked at the two as though they were idiots and said, "Only me and Su Qin are left. Of course, I will go deal with Su Qin." Zhang Yi frowned and looked back at Ding Ning as though he was an idiot. "Little sect brother, I do not understand. What is so good about your plan?" Ding Ning laughed and said, "Her plan is to sacrifice herself. My plan can let the three of us win in the end. Of course, it is not just a little better." Nangong Kaishu looked at Ding Ning as though she was looking at an idiot. "All three of us win in the end? You mean you can defeat Su Qin?" Ding Ning nodded seriously. "I know you do not believe me, but I really can." Zhang Yi and Nangong Kaishu exchanged a look. "Little sect brother, I know you are talented, but your words sound like you are sacrificing yourself to trick us." Zhang Yi frowned and said, "This is not good." Nangong Kaishu took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. She said, "Give me a reason to believe you." Ding Ning looked at her and nodded. He said, "I have hidden things. Also, I read the Wind Willow Sword manual carefully in the library cave." At the mention of the library cave, Nangong Kaishu suddenly thought of many things. She grew excited and nervous, but she was still uncertain. She said suspiciously, "You really read the Wind Willow Sword manual carefully?" Looking at her clear eyes, Ding Ning was slightly embarrassed. He did not even know where the Wind Willow Sword manual was in the library cave. He had not paid attention to this sword manual, but he still had a confident expression. "Of course," Zhang Yi said. "Little sect brother." Ding Ning flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, "It's fine if you're soft-hearted, but if you continue to be so wishy-washy, I'll scold you. I choose to believe you, but if you can't do it and I can get the green suet jade, I will give it to you. Don't be so wishy-washy when the time comes." Nangong Kaishu took a deep breath. Her eyes flashed with a determined look. Ding Ning clapped his hands. "Deal. Little sect brother." Zhang Yi spoke again. Ding Ning frowned and was about to explode. "Due to the circumstances, I can only choose to believe you this time," Zhang Yi said immediately. Ding Ning's anger immediately turned to laughter. "Eldest sect brother, you are not bad." But to his embarrassment and anger, Zhang Yi walked past him. As he walked quickly towards Mo Chen, he whispered in his ear, "But the White Goat Library Cave does not have the Wind Willow Sword manual. The Wind Willow Sword manual is Su Qin's family heirloom. So, little junior brother, you still lied. A person must be honest, especially Nangong Kaishu. This girl is not bad." Chapter 82. Mo Chen couldn't help but look towards Ding Ning. But Zhang Yi moved slightly and blocked his view of Ding Ning. Zhang Yi looked warmly at him and the snow dandelion sword in his hand. He said politely, "Your sword is very good, but your cultivation is much weaker than mine. So you cannot be faster than me. Unless you can defeat me, your opponent can only be me." Mo Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced at Su Qin and Ding Ning nearby, and then nodded in greeting. "You are right." Hearing Ding Ning's insincere and nauseating call, Su Qin was silent for a moment, and then laughed scornfully. "You want to delay me and help others, but you think you can delay me?" Ding Ning shook his head and said slowly with a smile, "I do not want to delay you, but defeat you." Su Qin looked scornfully at him. "The night has passed, and the sun has risen. Stop dreaming. You did not believe I could pass the entrance tests of White Goat Cave at the gates of White Goat Cave. You also felt it was impossible, but I proved it to you. I passed the tests, and faster than you." Ding Ning put away his smile and looked calmly at him. He said, "Before this, You also thought I could not defeat He Zhaoxi. But I didn't just defeat him, I also defeated the opponents you drove over. You never understood where my confidence came from, but I am confident I can defeat you now." Su Qin stared at him with a cold gaze. Ding Ning looked back calmly and continued. "While I have been in White Goat Cave for the shortest time, White Goat Cave has given me many surprises. Shui, sect Uncle Li Daoji, eldest sect Brother Zhang, they are all very cute people. But just like how you did not like me from the start, I also did not like you from the start. You always have the presence of stepping on others to advance. Even your fellow sect brothers who respect and admire you are stepping stones you can step on at any time. I do not want someone like you to stay in White Goat Cave. So after you lose to me, it is best you disappear from my sight quickly. Otherwise, I will change my methods to deal with you." A smile appeared at the corners of Su Qin's mouth. His eyes shone with true murderousness. "You dare to threaten me? Senior sect brother Su Qin, I have said all I want to say, so do not waste words." Ding Ning also smiled. He held his sword across his chest and said, "This is the last time I will call you senior sect brother." Su Qin's expression did not change much, but the killing intent in his eyes grew thicker and thicker, like a flame burning in his eyes. What does this mean? There was dead silence on the viewing platform. Everyone's hearts were filled with disbelief. Ever since Zhang Yi walked towards Mo Chen and Nangong Kaishu stopped Lu Yangguang, Xie Changxing's fists had tightened. Seeing Ding Ning hold his sword against Su Qin, he could not control his emotions. He walked in front of Ku Shichuan and begged with a lowered head. Everyone on the viewing platform held their breaths. In this moment, all the spectating students felt that Su Qin's sword had become a spear that charged forward with pure speed and power on the battlefield. Ding Ning's pupils contracted violently. His body jumped slightly. He first raised the remnant sword in his hand and then pressed it down. He accurately used the front half of the sword to press down on the tip of Su Qin's sword. An enormous and irresistible power passed through the remnant sword into Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body first paused in the air and then fell heavily. Then he accelerated backwards and fell hard into the vine forest behind him. He caused all the remaining yellow leaves in the withered vine forest to fall and dance in the air. Su Qin's eyes gradually narrowed. There was no pride on his face. Ding Ning had stood up among the yellow leaves. He once again raised the eye-catching inky green remnant sword. His left hand wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He once again bared his white teeth at Su Qin and said with a smile, "This sword is still lacking." Nangong Kaishu stood in front of Lu Yangguang, facing this senior sect brother, who was half a head taller than her. She looked at Ding Ning's figure falling into the vines and kicking up yellow leaves. She took a deep breath and then exhaled. She gave off an ear-piercing howl. The fish scale sword in her hand attacked in a straight line. At the same time, the green vine short sword stabbed out of her left sleeve. It also moved in a straight line and gave off layers of power. Lu Yangguang stopped breathing. He retreated and swung his long sword with all his power. The sword light seemed to form a shield of light in front of him. There was a loud explosion. His retreating figure suddenly sped up, and he could not steady himself after taking 5 or 6 steps back. Blood dripped from his hand and palm. His face grew pale again. He looked at the bloody path by Nangong Saishu's waist. He breathed rapidly and said in a trembling voice, "You are so seriously wounded. Why do you still use such a strong sword move? You cannot last long like this." Nangong Kaishu looked at him and said unconcernedly, "I do not need to last long. This is the final battle. I only need to defeat you before I fall." Lu Yangguang's voice had only been trembling before, but when he looked at her eyes, his bleeding hand uncontrollably trembled. Whether or not you can withstand my first 2 attacks is not important. What is important is whether or not you can withstand my 3rd attack. Looking at Ding Ning's provocative smile, Su Qin was not angry. He said softly, "If you cannot withstand my 3rd attack, one of your arms may be completely crippled." Su Qin's voice was dark and cold. Other people would feel great terror, but Ding Ning's gaze was unusually calm. He shook his head and said softly, "Since you say so, then it may be your arm that is crippled." Su Qin was expressionless. He would do whatever it took to complete what he decided to do. He took a deep breath and pushed out all the negative emotions in his body. Then he poured all the vital energy in his body into the purple longsword in his hand. There was a hum. The seal scripts on the purple longsword were so bright they looked like they were about to split. The blade was so smooth it looked like water would drip out. The edge of the sword extended outwards and became thinner. However, the sword did not become even straighter due to the concentration of power. Instead, the entire sword curled slightly, like a slightly curled willow leaf. Chapter 83. Zhang Yi had not attacked in the beginning. He had only been looking worriedly at the battle between Ding Ning and Su Qin. But when he saw Su Qin's vital energy pour out of his body, his expression changed dramatically. His feet paused slightly, and he was about to fly over. Yet at this moment, Mo Chun, who had been motionless all this time, took a deep breath. He channeled all the vital energy stored in his arm into the snow dandelion sword in his hand. Transparent lines appeared in the air between him and Zhang Yi. In the next moment, the snow dandelion sword in his hand seemed to burn and gave off light. His body seemed to be lifted by the power of the snow dandelion sword, flying forward and stabbing towards Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi had a gentle personality. His sword was like green jade and unusually warm. But when he felt the true murderousness in Su Qin's attack, he was not as gentle as usual. A low shout came out of his mouth, and countless white sword chi suddenly surged out of the green jade-like sword body. These sword energies quickly gathered at the tip of the sword. In a moment, it seemed to become a small white mountain. He used all of his strength to lift the sword and move the small mountain, smashing it towards Mo Chun. This was the white goat mountain carrying sword. It was one of the most difficult and powerful sword moves in the white goat sword manual to master. There was a loud explosion. Mo Chun felt as if he had been smashed by a small mountain. Several strands of pure, true essence even directly invaded his chi along with the vibrations of the sword. A surge of blood came out of his mouth. He immediately retreated a dozen steps. Zhang Yi turned around, but there was no joy on his face, because Su Qin had already drawn his sword. Along with the subtle movements of his wrist, the entire purple longsword curled up in a strange way, forming a hollow flood dragon. This hollow flood dragon was like a scabbard that accurately caught Ding Ning's sword move and covered Ding Ning's remnant sword and half of his arm. When Su Qin stabbed, Li Daoji instinctively took a step forward on the viewing platform, and his hand landed on the sword hilt in front of his chest. Almost all the students on the viewing platform felt a strong chill in their hearts. This bastard! Di Qingmei's expression changed dramatically. He was so angry that he almost lost control of the blue energy in his sleeve. Originally, he did not have good intentions towards Ding Ning, but Xue Wangshu's words had not only caused him to gain enlightenment in his cultivation, but also caused him to reflect on his own way of life. His view of Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and the other White Goat Cave disciples had completely changed. At this moment, Su Qin's attack was vicious. Every part of the curled sword had great power. Right now, his sword move covered half of Ding Ning's arm. It was not as simple as just sending Ding Ning's sword flying. If this attack landed, the meridians and bones in half of Ding Ning's arm would shatter. Su Qin had used up all of his vital energy to launch this attack. In terms of speed and power, Ding Ning could not compare. Now, the sword move was like a cage that covered Ding Ning's sword and half of his arm. Even he could not think of a way to defeat this attack. Su Qin is too insidious. How is this a trial by fire between fellow disciples? When Su Qin's sword move first appeared, Xie Changxing started to curse angrily. Xie Ro could not help but feel cold. She had always been a woman stronger than many men, but at this moment she felt a strong sense of helplessness. Ku Shichuan had a disdainful smile at the corners of his mouth. In his eyes, the terrifying scene of Ding Ning's arm being mangled and bone flying appeared. But in his view, Ding Ning had asked for this. Everyone could see Su Qin's intentions, but no one could stop Su Qin's attack in time. The spinning sword wrapped around Ding Ning's remnant sword and half of his arm. It started to quickly tighten and curl like a willow leaf losing its moisture. This curling caused different parts of the sword to have different rhythms. It was as if many swords were using different speeds to attack Ding Ning's arm with their edges and bodies. There was not much room to maneuver in this small space. In this kind of space, Ding Ning's arm could not move, and he could not use any exquisite sword moves. Even the power of the peak energy refinement realm was not enough to match Su Qin's vital energy realm power. No one seemed to be able to change the fate of Ding Ning's arm being cut off. However, something strange seemed to be happening in the cold air at this moment. Su Qin looked coldly at Ding Ning. He suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. Because Ding Ning's expression was still very calm and even somewhat at ease, his grip on his sword hilt tightened, and his knuckles grew whiter and whiter. Ding Ning was even more at ease than Su Qin had imagined. In everyone's view, this unsolvable and dangerous attack was nothing to him. Compared to the truly exquisite sword moves of the world, Su Qin's attack was a child's play. Of course, with his true cultivation and realm, there was only one way to deal with Su Qin's attack. However, as long as there was one way, it would be enough. As Su Qin's sword quickly tightened like a dehydrated willow leaf, his physical energy flowed smoothly into the many seal scripts on the last flower remnant sword in his hand. At the same time, they flowed into those tiny cracks that extended like the sword hilt. There were many tiny white flowers on the body of the dark green sword in his hand. They carried a poignant yet beautiful aura as they flew forward and then disappeared. Then the inky green sword truly split open and spread apart. The dark green sword's body was like a blooming flower, dispersing into countless sword threads. Moreover, as the true energy flowed, these sword threads rapidly extended in the air, growing longer and longer. Everyone on the grandstand held their breaths. Everyone, including Di Qingmei, was shocked and perplexed. Some people even lost their souls. How could something like this happen? Ding Ning's arm remained straight and motionless in the shrinking purple longsword. Yet these flying sword threads landed on Su Qin's palm, Su Qin's wrist, and Su Qin's arm. Many of the edges of Su Qin's purple longsword were only a short distance from Ding Ning's arm. Yet Ding Ning's expression was still calm, and even his breathing was not disturbed. He only maintained the flow of physical energy and allowed the sword threads to pierce Su Qin's flesh, cut through the tendons in Su Qin's flesh, and even penetrate his bones. In this moment, tiny flowers of blood appeared on Su Qin's sword-wielding hand. His arrogant face instantly turned pale and distorted. He let out an extremely shrill shriek, and like a wounded bird, he flew backwards. The purple longsword was just a hair away from cutting Ding Ning's arm. Yet all the tendons and flesh were cut, and even the bones were riddled with holes. He could not use any more power. A loud crash was heard. The curled, purple longsword spun uncontrollably in the air. It collided with many sword threads in the air and created many small sparks. Yet, to the shock of many people on the viewing platform, the sharp edge of this purple longsword could not cut through any of the seemingly small sword threads. After the sword threads scattered and softened for a moment, they quickly recovered their hardness and straightness. They quickly gathered and turned back into an inky green remnant sword. Su Qin screamed as he retreated. His rapid retreat caused the sword threads to bring out more pieces of flesh and bone as they left his arm. His left hand was twisted out of shape like a boneless phoenix claw. As he screamed, he shouted the question many people wanted to ask. What sword is this? Ding Ning's gaze landed on the inky green remnant sword in his hand. He did not answer Su Qin's question and remained silent. At this moment, he was not even thinking about Su Qin's hand. He was thinking about the many stories of this sword and its owner. On the deathly silent viewing platform, Duanmu Lian looked at the inky green remnant sword. The scene of the sword's extension remained in his mind. He finally overlapped this half-broken sword with a famed sword from a long time ago. He said in disbelief, the last flower sword that only cares about what is in front of it and not behind it. Each blow is like the last. This is Ba Mountain Yan Xinlan's last flower sword. Some students on the viewing platform had never heard of this sword. Some had, but because they had not experienced the era before the Yuanwu Emperor's ascension, when many stunning cultivators of the Qin dynasty had disappeared, they were still young. Chapter 84. A pill medicine to increase cultivation. A sword like this, how many more secrets do you have? Su Qin laughed maniacally. Ding Ning said calmly, this has nothing to do with you. The key is that your hand that uses the sword is crippled. I can see that you are born left-handed. So even if you use your right hand to practice the sword, your natural disadvantage will cause your sword to be very mediocre. Su Qin's smile completely disappeared. His face began to turn pale, even uglier than the ghost faces in the paintings. A teacher from the Green Vine Sword Academy rushed out of the vine forest with a medicine box towards Su Qin. Do not come near me. But before he could get close, Su Qin looked at his bloody left hand and screamed at the Green Vine Sword Academy teacher like a wounded beast. The Green Vine Sword Academy teacher stilled and frowned. He was closer to the battlefield than the people on the viewing platform, so he could see what was happening here more clearly. You reap what you sow. He looked coldly at Su Qin, who had lost control of his emotions, and sneered. Starting today, do you think you are still the genius that needs many people in the sect to revolve around you? After saying this, he ignored Su Qin, whose hand was still dripping blood, and turned to walk towards where Nangong Kaishu and Lu Yangguang were fighting. Lu Yangguang had lowered his sword. Originally, he had the power to block Nangong Kaishu's attacks. But when he saw Ding Ning and Su Qin's fight end, his remaining courage disappeared. I admit defeat. He looked down and said to Nangong Kaishu, Little sect brother. Su Qin, Zhang Yi had not expected such a situation. He did not wish for Ding Ning to be injured, so he had sent out vital energy without regard for anything to break free of Mo Chen's entanglement. But because of his generous personality, he did not want to see Su Qin end up like this. He knew very well that falling from a genius to a piece of trash inferior to even ordinary cultivators was the most severe punishment for a cultivator. The result of this battle was too unexpected. Even Mo Chen had stopped. In his eyes, the Su Qin who used to be so valiant, who seemed to have everything under his control, and the Su Qin who was now like a ghost, were like people from two different worlds. He looked down and saw the sword in his hand. The him who possessed the snow dandelion sword was a completely different person from the past. The person who had given him the snow dandelion sword had hoped that he could stop Ding Ning from winning. So now, Su Qin and Liu Yangguang had lost. He could not defeat Zhang Yi and affect the final result, but he still felt that he had to do something. So he looked up, just as Zhang Yi was thinking about what to do, and if there was any way to heal Su Qin's arm, his body turned into a wild gust of wind. He passed by Zhang Yi and charged towards Ding Ning. Almost no one had thought that Mo Chen would act like this when the outcome was already decided. So even the teacher of the Green Vine Sword Academy stilled. Zhang Yi also stilled. He could not understand why Mo Chen did this. This is not good. However, he would not allow Mo Chen to cause any harm to Ding Ning. The moment his voice rang out, his entire body turned into a gust of wild wind. Along with the wild wind came a storm. The long sword in his hand was as smooth as jade. At this moment, countless sword shadows turned into a torrential rain, catching up to Mo Chen from behind and enveloping him. Mo Chen's gaze dimmed. He did not attack again. Because of Zhang Yi's attack, he understood that Zhang Yi's words were true. Zhang Yi was much faster than him. He could not break free from Zhang Yi and pose any threat to Ding Ning. Countless rainstorm-like sword energies sprayed around him, shattering countless leaves on the ground around him. Zhang Yi put away his sword and landed in front of him. It is the Ba Mountain Knight Rain Sword. Rain-scattering banana. On the viewing platform, Di Qingmei frowned and turned to look at Xue Wangshu. He said softly, "In the first year of Yuanwu, this is a sword manual that must be burned." Xue Wangshu looked at him and smiled with a hint of undisguised pride. White Goat Cave's library cave has many sword manuals like this. I do not think your actions are right, but I have to admit, even as an opponent, you are worthy of respect. Di Qingmei turned and sighed softly. Su Qin's mad gaze landed on the countless holes on the ground. Sensing the speed and power of Zhang Yi's attack just now, he finally understood that Zhang Yi's usual humility was true humility, thinking that if it was a fair fight, he could not even win against Zhang Yi. He laughed again. His laughter was sad, and his expression was strange. Zhang Yi frowned. Originally, he wanted to say something. However, when he saw Mo Chen lowering his head and removing the token from his body, he closed his mouth. His expression became gentle again, and he did not say anything else. Yet Ding Ning was not as benevolent as him. The snow dandelion sword in Mo Chen's hand, and his last action caused him to immediately understand many things. Li Lingjun used this snow dandelion sword to bribe you? He looked disdainfully at Mo Chen. So you are willing to die for those who understand you. Even at this time, you want to fight and see if you can kick me out of the top 3? Mo Chen was silent. The snow dandelion sword may be as important to you as your life, but to someone like Li Lingjun, it is just a beautiful decoration. To use such methods to deal with a wine shop youth who does not pose a threat to him, do not imagine him to be so perfect. He is not so noble. Ding Ning looked at him and sneered. Please tell him that I will make him regret provoking an opponent like me in the future. Between him and Mo Chen, Zhang Yi clearly heard Ding Ning's words. His relaxed brows furrowed again. He turned and urged, "Little sect brother, Li Lingjun is in the wrong, but there is no meaning in your quick tongue." Ding Ning said calmly, "There is the word quick in quick tongue. When some words are said, one will feel comfortable and happy. This is the meaning." "Little sect brother, this does not seem to be right," Zhang Yi said softly, depressed. "But I cannot convince you. My life actually has no reason to speak of." Ding Ning raised his head and looked at the morning sun that was warm and not so dazzling in late autumn. He said softly in his heart and showed a satisfied smile on his face. The Sword Trial Festival was an important step for him after he was exposed to the sunlight of Chongling. This step could finally be completed according to his plans. Then the marks on the wall of his home in Falling Parasol could be erased even faster. The viewing platform grew calm again. The vines behind Ding Ning that stretched like a wall gave off hissing sounds. Many thick vines slithered away like water snakes. Countless vines withered. Fallen leaves danced, and the wall of vines disappeared. A flat path appeared in front of Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and Nangong Kaishu. At the end of the path, at the exit of the Sword Trial Valley, there was a high platform. 3 pieces of green suet jade were placed on the 3 vines on the high platform. "Let's go." Looking at Nangong Kaishu, who had finished treating her wounds, and Zhang Yi, who still had a worried expression, Ding Ning started to walk towards the high platform. At this time, everyone on the viewing platform who had been shocked by his sword finally reacted. This wine shop youth, who had reached profound understanding in half a day and energy refinement in a month, had become the final victor. The golden sunlight fell on his back. Walking on the flat road covered in yellow leaves, his back seemed incomparably glorious at this time. Yet, for some reason, looking at the broken sword at his waist and his overly calm posture, Xia Ro's eyes moistened. She inexplicably felt that every step his thin and weak body took seemed to be abnormally difficult. Beside her, Xie Changsheng did not have such feelings. Thinking of how the brother-in-law he had called so many times was so capable and incredible, his face filled with bright light. He turned around and bowed to Ku Shichuan, whose expression was unknown. He could not disguise his pride. "In the end, I still have to thank you. I hope that you will say more about him at the Min Mountain Sword trials." Then he said to Ku Shichuan, who had turned into a statue in the sunlight. Li Daoji's expression did not change, but he was exceptionally satisfied inside. Chapter 85. In the Cold Wind. The wheels rolled over the withered yellow leaves, crushing them into even finer pieces that floated up on the road behind them. A carriage covered in thick black cotton slowly drove towards a relay station on the outskirts of Chongling. There were many swordsmen from the warden's office standing around the relay station out of the ordinary. These swordsmen were dressed in ordinary clothing, but had black metal swords at their waists. They looked at the carriage that came in the autumn and frowned in unison. They clearly knew who the person in the carriage was. When they thought about how this person was able to survive the cruel slaughter that night, and then thought about the reason this person had come, their expressions were all vigilant, and their hearts uneasy. In silence, the carriage stopped at the gates of the relay station. Wang Taishu, dressed in black brocade robes, walked out of the carriage. He pulled in his collar as though he was afraid of the cold, nodded politely at the swordsman, and then stepped through the gates of the relay station. With his hands behind his back, Yugu suddenly looked at the winter suite outside the window. His white hair was combed neatly. Even though he was dressed in the most ordinary of casual clothes, anyone who saw his murderous posture would quickly conclude that he was a general who had been on the battlefield for a long time and was covered in the aura of gold and steel. "You should not have come at all." Only when Wang Taishu walked behind him did this important official of the warden's office slowly turn around. He looked coldly at Wang Taishu and said, "To be able to survive that kind of night, your luck is already extremely good. You should properly enjoy the rest of your life that was not easy to come by." Wang Taishu looked at this powerful official and shook his head. He said, "General Yu, you are wrong. I was able to survive that night, not because of luck, but because many people died for me." Yugu's expression turned cold. Wang Taishu coughed softly, took out multiple files from his sleeve, and handed them to Yugu. Yugu already knew what was recorded in these files. He did not immediately take them, and said gravely, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Wang Taishu laughed and said softly, In the eyes of many nobles, we are small fish and shrimps in the marketplace, things that can be casually crushed to death, things that can be washed away by a rain. However, each of my dead brothers had a family, old and young. If I do not do anything, my heart will not be satisfied. There is no meaning in living. Yugu glanced at him and took the files. He slowly opened them, and his expression grew colder the more he read. We have many files that are enough to send many officials to prison. How many officials in Chongling have not done shady business and taken black money? Wang Taishu looked calmly at Yugu. Originally, I do not interfere. Su Hashan, Xie Changsheng, and the others looked in puzzlement at Nangong Kaishu. Shock even appeared in Xie Changsheng's eyes. Nangong Kaishu, did you and him cultivate together for a night in the library cave and develop feelings for each other and decide to marry each other? Do not be so childish. Nangong Kaishu's expression darkened. She looked at Ding Ning's back as he left. She knew that since Ding Ning had said so, he would allow her to tell these people the reason. So she took a deep breath and said softly, because his body has a problem. It is a rare body with excessive yang. If he did not have special encounters, his body would have deteriorated when we were at our strongest. Xie Changsheng was stunned. He really admired Ding Ning's performance, so he couldn't even make a joke at this moment. Even if his body has such a problem, I will not change my decision. Xie Ro bit her lips. I will do my best to help him. I have already learned that there is usually no cure for this kind of premature deteriorating body. But Min Mountain Sword sect is not an ordinary sect. Some people in this sect may have a solution. Nangong Kaishu looked at her, Xie Changsheng, and the others. She nodded and said, if we really have a solution, we will do our best to help him when the Min Mountain Sword trials. This is too difficult. Su Hashan shook his head worriedly. The Min Mountain Sword trials would be in the middle of the summer next year. Starting from now, it would only be half a year. Even though Ding Ning had such a cultivation speed and performance, he still did not have much confidence when he thought of the performance of those monsters in the past. He is fighting for his life. We will do our best. Nangong Kaishu nodded and said gravely, all right, we will do our best for the Min Mountain Sword trials. Xie Changsheng, Su Hashan, and Xie Ro reached out and gave each other a high five, encouraging each other so solemnly for the sake of another's victory seemed to be a very laughable thing. But this was a matter of life, and they had to make something that seemed impossible possible. The atmosphere was unusually solemn. Chapter 86. You are too cold to them. Li Daoji appeared in front of Ding Ning. He glanced at Xie Changsheng, Xie Ro, and the others in the distance. Then he looked coldly at Ding Ning and said slowly, do not misunderstand. I mean, even if you do not like Xie Ro's actions, you do not have to treat them so coldly and roughly. Ding Ning was silent for a moment. Li Daoji waited patiently for him. Ding Ning looked at the broken sword at his waist and said softly and slowly, Sect Uncle Li Daoji, since you helped me find this broken sword, you should know the story related to this sword. Li Daoji's brow furrowed. You know the story of this sword. Before the Yuan Wu Emperor ascended the throne, the Qin dynasty had a famous cultivation place called the Bazin Kendo Ground. Ding Ning's expression was calm. He said in a light tone as though he was telling a story. In many stories, the Bazin Kendo Ground is a higher existence than Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate, because the Qin dynasty defeated the three dynasties and even helped the Yuan Wu Emperor ascend the throne. Many cultivators who were decisive came from the Bazin Kendo Ground. But there was a great change before the Yuan Wu Emperor ascended the throne. Countless cultivators who were originally loyal to the Qin dynasty became traitors overnight. Some of them were of high status. Even the Yuan Wu Emperor had to admit that they had a great influence on the future of the Qin dynasty. Yan Xinlan of the Bazin Kendo ground was one of them. If she said something the Yuanwu emperor wanted to hear and publicly expressed her attitude, she could have lived nobly. The Bazin Kendo ground would have continued to exist, and today it would have a higher status than Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate. However, she chose to wave her sword at the Yuanwu emperor to show her unyielding attitude. Hearing Ding Ning's words, Li Daoji's expression grew more unnatural. He finally couldn't help but say, "What does a child know? Many things happened before you were born. Since you know so many stories, you should understand that many stories can't be mentioned again. And what do these stories have to do with your current attitude towards them?" Sierro's personality is likely very similar to the master of this last flower sword. I do not dislike her, and even admire her, but you know my situation better than anyone else. Ding Ning looked up at him and said, "You know that I have offended an important person in the military. Even Li Lingjun is concerned about me. My physical condition will determine that I will climb up quickly in Chongling. I do not know how many people I will offend. I will risk my life to do some things because I have a goal, but I cannot drag them with me to do something like this. You worry that Sierro will have the same fate as the master of this last flower sword." Li Daoji said disdainfully, "You are thinking too far ahead." Ding Ning shook his head. If a person does not think far ahead, they will have immediate worries. Li Daoji stopped persuading Ding Ning and turned around, but after walking a few steps, he stopped and turned to look at Ding Ning. He said, "You mentioned the story of the master of the last flower sword, but do you know what the master of the last flower sword thinks? How do you know she is unhappy compared to living the rest of her life in luxury? She would probably be happier if she fought until her sword broke and died like this. Not many people can live without regrets, but she may have done it." Ding Ning was silent. In these years in Chongling, he had seen many people he usually did not pay attention to. He had also seen all kinds of people he had never talked about before. Peddlers, fishermen, woodcutters, prostitutes, rich merchants, slaves. There were also many immigrants from the Wei, Han, and Zhao dynasties who had slowly merged with Chongling and become citizens of the Qin dynasty. Some still remembered their homeland, some people on the fringes, and some people who had completely forgotten their homeland. They wanted to obtain the same status as the people of Chongling and climb up in the Qin dynasty, but were pushed aside. He had comprehended many things from these people and learned to stand in their shoes and see some things. He admitted that Li Daoji's words were correct, but he was certain that if Li Daoji knew what kind of rebellious heart was beating in his chest, he would not say such things. No matter how outstanding and admirable the legendary first Mr. Zhao of the Zhao Sword Furnace and Bai Shanshui of Cloud Water Palace were, who would persuade people to be friends with such rebellious people. Some things were easier for future generations to judge and see clearly after they had passed. In the past, in the wars between the Qin dynasty and the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, the situation changed rapidly. Hundreds of thousands of swordsmen could die in one battle, and thousands of cultivators could be lost. No one could predict the outcome. But now that the Han, Zhao, and Wei Huifei were destroyed, many of the history books in the future had the same opinion about the reasons for victory and defeat. In the current mainstream history books, and even the authoritative records, the Han dynasty was destroyed mainly because they failed to move the capital. The original capital of the Han dynasty, which had once relied on some pill sects, had been Yangdi, but some strategists of the Qin dynasty had used many methods to instill some ideas into Emperor Ai of Han and painted a beautiful future. This caused him to believe that if the Han dynasty wanted to have greater power, they had to move the capital to Luoyi. At the time, Moving the capital to Luai seemed to have great benefits because there was Shao Mountain to the left of Luai. The Jade Valley in Shao Mountain had dense spirit energy and was the best cultivation place in the world. If many sects moved to the Jade Valley, they could send more powerful cultivators to the dynasty. To the right of Luai was the fertile land of Lushu with plenty of granaries. But many people and nobles did not move because of the capital, because of the loss of benefits. There were many conflicts with Emperor Ai of Han. After the capital was moved, some new factions rose up and divided the new capital. This caused the power of the dynasty to decrease, and in the end, it was destroyed. The destruction of the Wei was two major events. One was the plan of the Spirit Canal. Under the influence of some conspiracies, the Wei dynasty started to gather countless skilled craftsmen and wanted to build an enormous spirit canal that could absorb large amounts of spirit energy. The construction of this spirit canal used up countless resources of the Wei dynasty, and the country's power gradually weakened. The other one was the Wei Cloud Water Palace's monopoly. At a certain time, many astounding cultivators appeared in the Cloud Water Palace. The king of Wei became more and more reliant on the Cloud Water Palace. Many things leaned towards the Cloud Water Palace. In the end, the Cloud Water Palace dominated, and many cultivation sects withered or even died. The destruction of the Zhao was the classic use of sowing dissension. At the most crucial time of the Qin dynasty and the Zhao dynasty's war, the Qin dynasty successfully convinced the king of Zhao that the Zhao sword furnace would work with the Qin dynasty and eventually take his position. So he killed the strongest grandmaster of the Zhao and created the sword of the Zhao sword furnace. Then the Qin dynasty's army had no more fear and destroyed the Zhao dynasty in less than 3 months. Even for many people of the Qin dynasty who had made many plans and won in the end, there were many things they could learn from and ponder about in the destruction of these 3 dynasties. After all, in the ever-changing war, who knew how many great figures were exerting their strength, and who knew how many schemes were being carried out at the same time? Only in the future would one discover which ones had played a role, especially the fact that the Wei Cloud Water Palace dominated and caused many pill sects to weaken and affect the country's power. This was a warning to the dynasties. So at this time in Chongling, while the Yuanwu emperor had more control than the previous emperors of the Qin dynasty, and he, the empress, and the 2 prime ministers formed a group that firmly suppressed and controlled all the nobility of the Qin dynasty, the central dynasty deliberately maintained most of the cultivation places in their initial state. Other than providing some protection and support, they were allowed to grow naturally like weeds. Chapter 87. In Chongling, an official of the Bureau of Ceremonies walked nervously with his head down on the stone path with tall pine trees on both sides. In front of him, an old imperial censor dressed in gray robes stood in the middle of the stone path. The closer he got to this imperial censor, the more sweat this official of the Bureau of Ceremonies sweated. Official Li, when he walked in front of this imperial censor and bowed, the back of this official's thick robes was completely soaked. There is no need for this. This imperial censor, Li glanced coolly at him and said slowly, "You know that my duty is to bring the Holy One's decrees to promote or demote officials. Since I want to meet you, and you have not done anything to promote you recently, you should be sure that you will be demoted. The matter is confirmed, and there is no need to be so nervous and worried." Hearing the words in the cold wind, this official did not calm down. He felt the wind grow colder, and even his body started to tremble. "Your previous rewards have been forfeited. You will go to the border and enlist for 5 years. If you want you and your family to have a good life in Chongling, you should accumulate more military merits in these 5 years," Imperial Censor Li said expressionlessly. The religion sector official raised his head his expression extremely ugly. Sir Li, I know that the reason I suffered this type of demotion is because I was on the escape route Bai Shanshui took that day, but I believe that there were many other officials on that route. Why was I punished so heavily? You think you are the only one who was punished so heavily? Imperial Censor Li shook his head expressionlessly. Before you, I met 5 people here. That day, Bai Shanshui charged out of the city. Including you, there were 17 Chongling cultivators on his escape route that could have delayed him. 8 of them acted and died to Bai Shanshui's sword. If the 9 of you acted, the sealed chariots of the Tiger Wolf army would have been able to set up a formation to stop Bai Shanshui. Of the 9 of you, 7 are officials of the court. These 7 officials will all be demoted. The official of the Bureau of Ceremonies had an even uglier expression, but he could not speak. Imperial Censor Li continued to speak. You cherish your lives and don't dare to step forward. Have you ever thought about how shameful this is? Bai Shanshui killed his way out. The Qin dynasty has so many strong armies, so many cultivators, and he killed his way out of the capital Chongling. And not when the war was urgent and Chongling was empty. As a man of Qin, we could have stopped him and killed him. Instead, we let him sing crazily with his sword in his hand, as if he was in an unstoppable place. This is even more humiliating than letting him escape after a hard fight. His Majesty asked me to speak with you in the Ying Garden so that you can think about it. Outside Chongling, on a certain vast part of the Wei River under the lead clouds, a small boat with a black awning slowly floated along with the waves. A fishing boat came from the distance. When it came close to the awning boat, a faint light flashed. A man dressed as a fisherman landed firmly at the bow of the awning boat. But this awning boat did not even sway. This man dressed as a fisherman was one of the direct disciples of Cloudwater Palace, Fan Zhuo, who had disguised himself as a carriage driver in front of the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall a few days ago. He looked at the outline of Chongling in the distance. A hint of disdain appeared at the corners of his mouth. He said to the cabin covered in black curtains, "You are the person who sent me a letter a few days ago. Which noble person of Chongling is the master behind you?" The black curtains were pulled apart by a thin bamboo pole and hung on both sides. The white-haired advisor in black robes sitting in the cabin gestured for him to enter the cabin. He said, "The one who told you to leave was General Liang." General Liang, who is waiting to be made a marquis? However, even though Fan Zhuo was dressed like a fisherman, he still exuded the insufferably arrogant aura unique to a great rebel. He had no intention of entering the cabin at all. He only mocked. "What do you mean by rebelling in the nest? A fish is trapped in a vat and wants to jump out. But without some help, it cannot enter the great rivers to swim freely and will fall to the ground and dry to death." The black-robed advisor smiled unconcernedly. He pointed at the majestic Chongling in the distance and said, "For you, Chongling is also a vat. You will be in danger if you enter. So General Liang feels that you need some friends." Fan Zhuo sneered. "We cannot become friends with the Qin," the black-robed advisor said coolly. "Even if we cannot become friends, we can at least use each other. Also, you owe us a favor. If not for the letter I gave you, you would not know that you were targeted by the Divinity Bureau. When it was time to close the net, even Bai Shanshui would not be able to escape Chongling, much less you. While I do not know how many secrets of the Lonely Mountain Sword hoard you have stayed in Chongling for too long. Anyone can conclude that there should be something related to the Lonely Mountain Sword hoard in Chongling. Is it a key? Or more clues?" Before Fan Zhuo could speak, the black-robed advisor looked into his eyes and said, "But you left Chongling in a hurry. You cannot get what you want. You must enter Chongling again. So you accepted the suggestion in my letter and came here to meet me today." "You are right," Fanjwa sneered. "I have to admit that your Divinity Bureau and a few other nobles have the ability to discover our tracks and even guess at some of our intentions. I've come here to see if there are any nobles with enough weight to make use of each other.